Not only characters, but ideas have their own leitmotifs too. There's one, for example, for destiny. And there are, of course, lots for love. So the orchestra, instead of merely providing the backing for the characters to sing to, is expressing the meaning of what's going on stage. Rather than the music responding to the stage action, it's actually the other way around. What we see on stage is a visual representation of the music itself. Here, for example, when Brunhilde takes the ring from her dead lover Siegfried at the end of the opera, the orchestra is signposting for us all the complex emotions she's feeling. Leitmotif can tell us what's going on in what we'd now call a character's subconscious. Needless to say, Wagner's use of leitmotif is highly sophisticated and many-layered. There are in fact hundreds of leitmotifs in the Ring cycle, and by the end they're cropping up at an absolutely astonishing rate, sometimes several at the same time. He does all sorts of things with them. He turns them upside down, he weaves them into each other, he can change their mood, their key, their speed, or their instrument. It's a way that the orchestra can tell us what's going on in the story at any one time. Nowadays, we take it for granted that in a film, the music score points us in certain emotional directions. It helps us focus on what the filmmaker wants us to see. Without music, a film can seem totally lifeless and without structure. Where would Jaws have been without John Williams' threatening double basses and cellos telling us that the shark was coming? That, in a way, was a leitmotif. And we owe this technique principally to Richard Wagner, who died before the age of cinema. For him, too, the leitmotif gave the Ring cycle structure and meaning. The Ring changed the course of music, but the extraordinary thing is, it very nearly didn't happen at all. We may well owe the existence of one of the greatest works of the late 19th century to one of its most oddball characters, the walking monument to Wagner, Mad King Ludwig of Bavaria. While he was working on the Ring, Wagner was undergoing a midlife crisis of Wagnerian proportions. He was a broke, exiled political terrorist living off the kindness of friends in Switzerland. He was bitter and unhappily married. Though not, I suspect, as unhappily married as his poor, long-suffering wife Minna, who had to put up with his reckless overspending and relentless womanizing. Many of his great works, operas that are now standards in the repertoire, like Lohengrin, The Flying Dutchman and The Master Singers of Nuremberg, were virtually unperformed. To the musical establishment, Wagner was a nutter. Luckily for him, another nutter fell in love with him and was in a position to alter radically his state of affairs. This other sad fellow was the doomed and naive King Ludwig of Bavaria. Ludwig of Bavaria is one of history's most peculiar monarchs, which, let's face it, is saying something. Ludwig II grew up in his parents' castle of Hohenschwangau, 60 or so miles from Munich. Ludwig's childhood here was spent surrounded by paintings of the German legends that Wagner at the same time was setting to music. Their shared passion for Teutonic tales was to be the making of this distinctly odd couple. Now, the poor lad wasn't exactly normal even at this stage, being somewhat self-indulgent and foppish at the best of times. But it was when he became king that the real madness began. Only 18 when he took the throne, Ludwig embarked on a program of building ever more extravagant and absurd castles. The maddest was Neuschwanstein. Ludwig created for himself a whole fantasy world, spending money like it was going out of fashion and surrounding himself with extravagance and outrageous opulence. It was as if he was casting himself as the star in his own Age of Chivalry blockbuster. Each room at Neuschwanstein is dedicated to a Wagner opera, a gaudy and somewhat creepy shrine to the master. His bedroom, for instance, was dedicated to the thwarted passion of Tristan and Isolde. Ludwig was Disney before Disney, Michael Jackson without the llama, or Louis XIV in the wrong century. Shortly after Ludwig acceded to the throne, he sent a henchman round to tell Wagner that he thought his music was the answer to all his royal dreams, and that he would do whatever was in his power to get the operas produced. At first, Wagner thought the offer was some kind of wind-up, but he soon came to the conclusion that Ludwig must be absolutely right and completely sane to admire his music so much. Thus, Richard Wagner and King Ludwig began their weird and sycophantic relationship. Ludwig once wrote to Wagner, "I can only adore you, only praise the power that led you to me. More clearly and ever more clearly do I feel that I can't reward you as you deserve. All I can ever do for you can be no better than stammered thanks. An earthly being cannot requite a divine spirit." So, all very functional then. But what's beyond doubt is that thanks to Ludwig's generosity, not only was Wagner at last able to finish The Ring, he was also able to stage it in his own purpose-built theatre. Work on the new playhouse at Bayreuth began in 1873. It took 3 years to build at enormous cost to the state of Bavaria. A festival of Wagner's work is still performed here every year. By the time the Ring cycle was first put on, the critical tide had turned in Wagner's favour. He was now widely regarded not as a madman, but as a visionary. And not just because of his music. Wagner's theatre here in Bayreuth was itself revolutionary. The Ring cycle is full of special effects, never before dreamt of, and so brand new techniques had to be invented to bring them to life. But Wagner wasn't just interested in the staging. He was the first to insist that the auditorium remain dark during a performance. Nothing was allowed to take the eye from the phantasmagorical spectacle on stage, and certainly not the musicians. Instead of having a distracting orchestra pit in front of the stage, he hid the musicians underneath it, and their sound wafted up eerily into the auditorium in a sort of surround sound effect. In a way, what Wagner was doing was creating a form much closer to cinema than to 19th century theatre. It was a darkened magic lantern show, fantastical and all-embracing.